Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Better Life Project TV, the place to be to help make your awesome business and life happening. Now guys, I hope you are all sitting down. I hope you are comfortable. Get that bowl of popcorn, get that glass of water, fasten your seatbelts. I have got such a special guest lined up for the show today. Ladies and gentlemen, a virtual round of applause for Danny Lennon, MSc educator with Sigma Nutrition. I am so delighted that you came back onto the show for the second time, folks. Unfortunately, our first interview didn't go that well. Technology, as most of you know, is not my friend. Thank you for coming back onto the show and for giving more of your time. I wanted to get you onto the show so that we can understand a little bit about what it's taken for you to get to where you are right now. At the moment, you are Ireland and possibly the UK's leading nutritionist educator. You have, and you're going to have to correct me if I'm wrong, the Irish and UK #1 podcast in health and fitness?
Most weeks in Ireland, yeah. UK, we're still getting there.
Okay.
So if you're in the UK, make sure to download the podcast.
Yeah.
Catch up.
And you travel across Ireland delivering workshops and speaking at events. But how many years ago, 2-3 years ago, you were studying? Maybe 4 or 5 years ago, you were a teacher. So tell me about what the journey has been like so far and how you've gotten to where you are right now.
Yeah, so to try and keep it to some brief cliff notes so not to bore people. Like you say, when I was back in college originally, I started studying science education. And so at that point, I started getting into learning about how to read scientific papers and so on. And it kind of really just as a hobby, I was looking at nutrition just for myself because I was doing a lot of training, playing a lot of sports. So I started getting into sports nutrition mainly as a kind of hobby. And after graduating from college, went and became a teacher. I was a secondary school teacher for a year, teaching science.
I was going to say, what subjects were you?
So I was doing physics and biology. And during that time, I just started to think that maybe that wasn't the route for me. There was just something about working within that kind of structure and within that kind of school system that I just was getting an inkling that wasn't right for me. And at the same time, I was really getting drawn to a lot of this stuff to do with nutrition. And so at the end of that school year in June, my contract was finished. And so between then and the following September, when there was the new school year be starting, I kind of had a lag period where I wasn't contracted anywhere. I didn't have a full-time job anywhere. So that was the time I was like, okay, I'm going to do anything. Now is probably the time to go and do it. So made a decision to just to go down this nutrition route and make something happen there. And without really having a long-term plan or know how I'd make it happen or what I was even going to do, I went and did a master's in nutritional science. So that really took me about 18 months. And then during that time, I started to think of ways I could use that afterwards. And I started to get more and more drawn to going my own route and going the entrepreneurial route or starting a business. Or I didn't really know much at that time what it was going to be. And so went that route and after the Masters, managed to get onto a business accelerator program down in Cork with an idea I had for the business, developed a lot of business skills there, and then Sigma Nutrition started in April of 2014.
Wow.
And then from there it's going to be just rolling along till now.
So you have just passed the 2-year mark.
Correct, yeah.
And when you were studying nutrition and when you had this inkling that you wanted to explore the entrepreneurial side or the business owner side of things, did you go into it knowing where it would take you, knowing what it would look like? Did you go with a clear plan or a vision or goal or?
No, I wish I could say I did, but most of the stuff I realised, and it's kind of been a sort of a reoccurring theme as well, in that it was, I had an idea I wanted to go in a certain direction, but didn't know like what that end kind of point would be. And I just started doing things that end up, once I did that, it's like needing to get to the end of a street and not knowing what was around the corner and getting there and then being able to see, oh, here's a different route and then going down there. And so that's what I did when I wanted to go nutrition. I didn't know that I was going to start a nutrition consultancy business or a podcast or anything like that. I was like, okay, I'll go and do this master's and then I'll start figuring stuff out as I go. And the same thing with the business. When I first went into the business accelerator, the kind of idea for what that business might look like is completely different to, I suppose, the plans I have now, just because I didn't know back then what was kind of available. So there was no kind of set plan of, in 2 years, this is where Sigma Nutrition is going to be, and now I've just done that. It's been a case of taking some sort of action, getting somewhere with that, and then typical what most businesses do, take some sort of pivot in a certain direction when they see something opening up. And that's what happened. It's like, okay, this thing, and particularly the podcast, once I started doing that, seeing that this was a big thing and worked well with my skill set, and so put more attention that way, and then the business kind of just veers into different directions.
As you were talking, I had about a dozen questions I was going to ask you, and you just answered all of them so brilliantly. I was only in the house the other day, and there's a scene of a movie or something that I read, and it was just pivot.
Oh.
And I remember over the last couple of years, I've had to do that a number of times with my business as well. And I think it's something that a lot of us fail to do when we're working on a business, when we're, I guess, running a project or working within a company, that we forget to pivot, we forget to respond to the needs of the marketplace, we forget to listen. How did the podcast happen in all of this? Was a podcast a pivot? Was it you going, I just really want to talk to some great people? How did that come about?
Right, so the big thing was when I was starting Sigma Nutrition, I had realised that the big thing that was going to drive it was content. So consistently putting out lots of good content. And that, I was very lucky early on that was a realisation I made, that for a set period of time I had to put out really good stuff without getting any money in return or selling a service or a product. And so I kind of committed to that. So the typical things I was looking at: podcasts for audio, I'll put videos out on YouTube, I'll write a blog post every week. So I had all this stuff in my mind. And initially you kind of see that, okay, that was probably number one, too much to try and do all at once. But then my own kind of skill set kind of fell in better with the audio medium and putting out podcasts and interviewing people. And you don't know until you start doing it if your skill set is suited to that. Whereas I find it much, I can put out better quality content. I find it more enjoyable to do that than, say, producing high quality videos or a YouTube channel, or writing articles 3 to 4 times a week like some other people are really good at. And so once I started to see, number one, I was enjoying the podcast. It was working really well in terms of not only did I think it was producing good quality content, but people seemed to be drawn to that. And that was the thing that was driving most people towards the site and to getting to know me. It was all really through the podcast. And so at that point, I was like, okay, I'll just put more of my effort and resources into this and pull back from others. And really kind of just driving home on that as a kind of strength and forgetting about the other stuff. And so that was it was like realizing that was the thing that was getting me a good bit of leverage early on, that I was good at, and then putting more effort in towards that.
And how did you grow the podcast to what it is now? Is it something that happened very organically, or was it something that you constantly had to actively build on, pursue amazing speakers, all that sort of stuff? Because the podcast is incredible and it's huge within Ireland. And don't forget, if in the UK, to subscribe. But how did it happen? Was it intentional or was it organic?
Yeah, so most of the growth was completely organic, in that there's been very little, a tiny percentage of it from maybe paid growth on Facebook advertising, which has been a very small amount, but nothing has gone really towards a podcast on that. So it's really been, I can chart the numbers each month and the downloads, and this kind of steady, really slow growth over those first few months. And then maybe like 7 to 8 months in, it starts to reach a point where you see a slight growth. And then going into the second year, you start to see almost this like tipping point where it just exponentially takes off. And so it's at that point now where every month it's beating the previous month in terms of downloads. But it's all a organic thing. And I think people then who find it are obviously going back and listening to old episodes. So just a compound effect. And that's been it. It's just been consistently putting out good stuff. You know, it's almost a cliche at this point. And like perseverance and keep putting out good stuff over and over again. And like I said, I was just lucky to have one of those realizations early. Okay, I'll commit to doing this for a long period of time. And so there's been an episode out every Tuesday, maybe sometimes Wednesday or Thursday, but pretty much every single week for the last 2 years and 3 months, there's been an episode out, an interview for an hour. So that just sort of consistency, and then if it's good, people get it. And I think that's a thing people miss sometimes as well, in that with all the marketing stuff and the tricks and the headline articles and tweaking ads or whatever, like the core product or the service you're giving people still has to be good. Because otherwise, you can get them to listen to the podcast once, If it's no good, they won't listen again. So
Yeah.
that's where I was at.
You've got a whole bunch of people on the other side of this ferociously taking notes and writing stuff down. What's your favourite part of the podcast? What do you enjoy so much about doing it?
I think it's probably two parts. One, obviously talking to the people I get to talk to. I just love those conversations. For me, I get to learn so much as well. And it almost forces me to stay learning, because if I'm going to be talking to these people, I have to be up on the research in that area. So it's almost a way to keep me on top of all the research in the field just by having to do this every week. It's an accountability thing. I love getting to connect with these people. A number of them now I call friends. I can, if I see something in research, I can ask them a question and send them a message. I've met a few of them in person. That's all awesome. But then on the other side, it's when people actually have listened to it and then send me an email about it. And we may have never met, and they just say how much the podcast has helped them, or how much they're enjoying it. Like that is like it sounds kind of like, I don't know if it's just a bit like it's hard to imagine until you start getting that stuff. Like it really does impact me more than I thought it would. Joe, when someone said, "Oh, people saying that they're enjoying stuff," like saying, "Oh yeah," but then when you actually get a kind of heartfelt message from someone, it makes a big impact. And so that's probably the biggest part. That's actually helping someone.
When you started off on your journey 2 years and 3 months ago, you seemed to have a very good idea that there was 50% of your job was the business, running that, being an entrepreneur, and the other 50% was doing the nutrition. What has been the most challenging part of the business and the nutrition, staying on top of it side of things?
Yeah, so I suppose for me, like creating content and coaching people is probably the easy part, because I enjoy it. I know I'm very confident in what I'm doing, and I never kind of second guess any of that stuff. Whereas when it comes to the business side of things, there's a tendency to always second guess what we're doing. Are we making the right decisions? I've talked to you before about cases of trying to be perfect with stuff and not pulling the trigger on things, or not taking as much action on business type stuff as I should have. Then other things like just generally being more structured with how the business is laid out and knowing very specific numbers. Like I can procrastinate on that stuff a lot more, because I don't like looking at spreadsheets of business numbers and what we're doing and putting together like proper business plans and looking at cash flow and all that stuff. So it's very easy for me to push that aside, especially as an entrepreneur where I'm the person in charge and I've no one to hold me accountable to that stuff. So that's probably been the biggest challenge, making sure that the business is staying running as it should.
What steps do you take to overcome that, or to tackle it?
So the biggest thing is probably just trying to get people around me that are going to call me out. So it's okay at this point where I have an accountant who will be looking for certain stuff, and I have to send them in. Okay, so that takes care of some of the financial things. Only recently I've been getting myself organised with more of a kind of business coach and a mentor to make sure I'm kind of following through on that type of thing. And that's probably the one thing that I think I should have done a lot earlier, is invested more money into coaching in that area. Because I've done it in other areas. I've done it in consultations for people to do my own training for me. I've gone to tons of seminars. I've done things around like the life coaching stuff. We've done like all these different areas in different development, but instead of very specific stuff on business models and stuff, I maybe presumed that because I'd gone through the accelerator, I think I have a good bit of knowledge in that area.
Yeah, you definitely did.
But it's more a point of accountability, I think, and having something on the line as well. I think paying money, a decent chunk of money for something makes a big difference.
There's always going to be something that you're going to look back on and wish that you had done. When you said that you were always aware, or that you learned very early on that you needed to provide good quality content that was valuable to people, for a lot of the idea makers or startups that I work with, that's the part that they struggle with the most, that they don't understand the value of making something that you could sell for €1,000 but giving it to the marketplace for free. So there's always going to be something there, I think. But it's then taking action on it. And was it easy for you to go, okay, this is what I need, I'm going to do it? Did you have to grapple with yourself a little bit?
No, to be honest, I think I'm still not there on that point of properly taking action and making it into a proper as successful as like a full-on business in terms of a money-making business as it should have been. In that, like you said, I think a big problem most people miss is they try and monetize stuff. How do I make money? Only think about that and forget about providing people content without expecting stuff in return. Whereas I went the complete opposite, but almost too much in that direction. In that I think I've spent nearly too much time only putting out good quality content, putting out like all the stuff that's out there and building up that momentum over time, where it got to a point where people were literally asking for things that they could pay money for, and just not being able to get to that point earlier, I think maybe, or have it structured well enough. And I think I still need to kind of work on that, but it's kind of coming along. So I think there is a kind of point where you can go past. There's a point of diminishing returns almost, in that you have to know that balance of being able to not only put out stuff, but able to then be able to get back in return. And a thing like, I think I'm sure you've come across it before, of giving people the opportunity to do it as well. Like people want to be able to support either content you're doing, or to be able to get a service or a product of someone that they trust and is putting out good stuff. So yeah, I think I probably haven't done a good enough job, but working on it.
Okay. Well, on behalf of the thousands of people that have benefited from your free stuff, thank you. What has been the most exciting thing that has happened in the last just over 2 years since you set up Sigma Nutrition? What has been the thing that will always stand out in your mind? Your proudest moment so far? I'm sure there's
I don't. A lot of the stuff is kind of reoccurring things. So, like I mentioned, with people emailing stuff, that's always a huge part. But if there's one kind of big moment, I think recently, a few months ago, I did a weekend seminar here in Dublin. So that was a full 2 days. So that sold out. So it was 95 seats for that, and fairly high ticket price as well. And just I think not only the fact that it sold out, but the type of people that were there. Lots of people that I knew were big in the fitness industry, that had like tons of coaching experience. The fact that they were willing to come along and not only the money, there's more the giving up 2 full days to listen to me talk was kind of a massive honor. There was people from around Europe that flew in just for that weekend. The fact that I got to meet them people in person as well. And any of the people that came along and get just to meet them and say thank you for coming or for listening to, like, that was huge. And that weekend, when I look back on once it was finished, was quite kind of humbling as well. So that one kind of sticks out, just because just seeing people in person, get to talk to them was huge, and it was a successful weekend all in all. So
I was sorry I couldn't make it, but I was keeping up to date with it, and I think myself and James were in London on the Saturday, and we found out that there was the 95 people, that it was a full house, and I was thrilled for you. Like, I can't think of anyone who deserves it more than you do. When you look back over the last 2 years and you look forward, what one thing have you been doing that you're going to continue to do? What one thing has kind of, do you feel, been or contributed to your success in some way? What one thing would you do every day to help you be successful?
I know definitely with every week would be the same thing of just being consistent with content. So you already touched on that. In terms of a daily thing, I think just trying, and it's something that I probably hadn't done enough until more recently, is remembering what it is or how I'm trying to structure everything and the underlying reasons why. So, for example, when I set up the business, I was thinking that I wanted this to be something that I could eventually do kind of from anywhere. So geographically independent was this kind of term I had in my mind.
It's my plan too.
And so that was one of the things. I had like 2 or 3 things that I wanted it to be. I wanted to be able to kind of pick and choose which kind of projects I was working on. Only work with people who were kind of set a few core values. And so that's starting to get there now. And I think that's the biggest thing of each day when I look at what tasks are there, is that fitting in with those kind of values, or is that taking me away from it? So that thing's been kind of huge. But there's a number of things every day that we can do, as I suppose, as part of a ritual, a routine, But that one kind of sticks out.
Yeah. The idea of being able to move a business online was one of the most exciting parts of my journey so far. There's just something so limitless about working online.
Right.
There's no boundaries. There's nothing stopping you from working with as many people as possible. And being in an opportunity or being in a place where we can do that is incredible. If there was someone watching this show and they wanted to set up their business and they were looking for just that one thing that you do every day to help you be successful, what is that one thing? What is that one thing that you would tell others to do? If it's being consistent, what are you being consistent at doing?
I would make sure that they have an idea of what is the most important thing in their business. Like, what is the main thing that they're working towards? Because there's loads of different little tasks we can spend our time on. But like, what is the one big thing? Either that's one big project, or what's the end point you're aiming towards, or what's the thing that's going to make that business money? And then every day looking at that and starting with something that directly impacts that.
Okay.
And so if that's an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever, that some sort of task has been done in that direction before you start falling into all the other tasks we inevitably have. So like, we always have email and social media, and you could spend a full day doing that stuff and it's not really pushed the business anywhere in the direction of that big thing. So I would say that have an idea of what that big thing is, and do one task that is going that direction.
You mentioned social media there. I use social media quite a lot with my business. I don't think I am very aggressive with it. I certainly have my days where, if I'm feeling very inspired, I use it as a medium to communicate or to talk to my community. What role has social media played in Sigma Nutrition with your business so far? Because I follow you on all of the various challenges. You wouldn't be a very aggressive user by any stretch of the imagination. But yet, in the health and fitness industry, it's almost unusual that in Ireland or in the UK, for someone to experience the levels of success they've experienced within this space of time, not to be aggressive on social media. So it's this strange paradox. What are your thoughts on social media? And what is your main platform that you communicate your message with?
Yeah, so the first caveat is that I'm not an expert on social media, so
Nor
people
am I.
shouldn't take advice from me. But yeah, mine has been, I like using Facebook quite a lot, but the way I've used it is more as a connection tool with people who either have found me through a mutual connection or listened to the show, or who I've connected with because we have a mutual kind of interest, or we get talking in certain forums. And I've spent a decent amount of time talking in forums, messaging people privately, getting to know people from the other side of the world within the fitness community on that. And I found that really useful, more than like putting out stuff to try and pull people in and send them somewhere. I've, on the other social media, like, I've tried to do a bit more on Instagram. I have some sort of presence there. I'll put out stuff now and again, but again, nothing too aggressive. My Snapchat is, at this point, virtually non-existent as a business thing. Like, I just don't, it's not something I've just dived into, and I can see the value. I've heard so many people that I know
Gary
what they want to do.
pushes it hard.
And that's the thing, and I've seen, like, so many people, like, I can see the value and where it could be, but there's also a point of where there's a limited amount of time I have and resources to put into. And it's like, I just haven't got to the point where, for me, I'm going to go down that route, because it's not as natural, I think, for me. Now, that could be a major mistake on my part, or it could work out well in that the time I'm saving there I can put somewhere else. So it just for me, it just hasn't, I just don't like really putting out my whole day in Snapchat story form, whereas I know other people are doing it and doing a really good job. I know people who have taken in tons of new clients through that, and people have really enjoyed their stories, but just not something I've kind of delved into.
It's almost as if you need to decide in advance what you're going to put your energy into, and then, like you said, be consistent with it. Social media is something that I openly talk about within my own community, about how much I love it and hate it all at the same time, and I'll go hard at Snapchat for a couple of days. Yesterday I was telling people about a walk I went with Lizzie and cows were chasing me. Really interesting stuff. But I'm really inconsistent with it. I made a decision a long time ago that my email list and my Facebook page were going to be the platforms from which I communicated my story, my advice, my tips and things like that. And I think I've benefited from that. I'm inconsistent with the other channels, but I'm consistent with Facebook. How do you talk to your people the most? Because you've got a really good newsletter that comes out weekly.
So there's obviously the email list is useful. I've tried to keep that to something that's not super long form, not invasive in any way. So it's one email a week with that week's podcast listed, some other piece of content people might like, a video of the week, and then a quote or lesson of the week. And so people could just read through that stuff, pick kind of what suits them, and that's the only real communication there. The rest has been the podcast. I think that people who regularly listen to the podcast, I mean, that's an hour of their week. Every week they're already listening with me talking on it. So I think that is a huge thing for building some sort of connection as well. Facebook, like I mentioned, I do quite a lot on. Instagram I'll be a bit, but that's pretty much it. So it's really through either email or Facebook for me at the moment. And I think like the other thing that it just reminded me of with the whole Snapchat thing is that I know that Gary Vaynerchuk is obviously awesome and knows far more than me, but I think maybe the big thing that a lot of people miss is they're doing stuff simply because Gary Vaynerchuk is doing stuff, and not realizing like why should you do it. And so for me, like I don't want to have my goal is not to have a $400 million business or to buy the New York Jets or to work all day, every day for 30 years. It's just, I've got the same goals. I can use stuff that he uses, but I don't have to constantly talk about hustling all day, 18-hour days all the time. I don't see the only reason to use Snapchat consistently is because he says to use it. It's like if I see a value in it, I'll do it. And there's other things I can pick up from other places and use that. So I think just make a decision on what you're comfortable using. And then just when you do, then go hard at it. So if I'm not going to go hard at Snapchat, there's no point in really dabbling, I think.
I think there's so many people who will benefit from that. Just decide what you want to use, be authentic on it, and go hard at that one. I've certainly fallen into that trap at Snapchat that you feel like you have to do something because everyone else is doing it. And I appreciate to a point you have to give the people following you what it is that they want, but you also need to draw the line between what you're comfortable doing, what feels natural, what feels right, and do something that allows you to take advantage of your strengths in some way, which for you is clearly your podcast. Because they're amazing. What advice would you give to someone who wants to set up their nutrition business, wants to set up a personal training business or a health and fitness business? They have maybe just left college, they've just finished their PT school. What would you tell them to do? What advice would you give to this new person starting off?
Easy. Go find someone who's done it and go talk to them. Whether that's meeting people informally and you can just ask a few questions to if they're willing to help. If you have the money to actually go and hire someone as a coach, whether you'll find someone who you can offer free services to that you can then mentor under or get work experience, go intern under someone who's doing stuff and then learn passively of how they're doing their business. Basically find someone that's doing that and go and talk to them. And that's going to learn far more than trying to just worm your way. I mean, you can, to a certain extent, with reading books and stuff like that, it's great, but that's what I do. If there's one thing, find someone else that's doing it and talk to them.
For you?
I've had a few, but one of the big ones early on was actually James. When I remember when I was going to do my
James.
You're James.
My James.
So as kind of long story short, when he had first set up RedFit,
because you were a member in his
I was a member as the first group that was there in the very first one, and so it was around that time I was going away to do my masters.
Alas, you're seeing my face because yet again I encountered a problem
with recording Better Life Project TV. I am extremely relieved to say that it was only the last portion of my interview with Danny that unfortunately didn't get recorded because of camera space and storage and all that sort of stuff. The only portion of the interview that you would have missed was me thanking Danny for taking the time out to come be on the show again, for sharing his wisdom and his advice. He is an incredible source of inspiration to me, not just in terms of how he lives his passion, but how he runs his business as well. So if he's been that much of an inspiration to me, I know that he will have inspired everyone who has listened to this show. There is so much wisdom in Danny's advice, but there will be magic when you can actually implement that, take action, and make it happen. So for whatever bit today that you heard myself and Danny talk about that gave you goosebumps, take action on that, guys. It's very important that you take small steps so that you can start to create that business and that life that you love. Inspiration, empowerment, and education is incredible, but it will only ever take you so far. The rest is up to you. So take action on the advice that you've learned and heard today. For anyone who is looking for more information on where you can find Danny, make sure you check out his website, sigmanutrition.ie. Connect with him on Facebook, Sigma Nutrition. Connect with him personally, Danny Lennon, MSc Educator. Follow him on Snapchat and Instagram. Make sure that you subscribe to his podcast, Sigma Nutrition Radio. And if you're listening from anywhere in the UK, you gotta subscribe and help him get to #1 in the UK. Thank you so much to everyone for listening to another episode of Better Life Project TV. Stay tuned to next week, where I'm going to interview myself on how you can overcome technological setbacks and challenges. Peace out, guys.